So, you know what paints you're going to use? What about brushes? Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, time for another back to basics video for you. Now, in the previous video we covered paint, and in this video I want to cover paint brushes. Now, as always, this series is aimed at beginners, but I really hope the information in it is useful to you. And let's have a chat about brushes. Okay, so paint brushes. Right, where do we start? Well, there's three ranges of paintbrushes effectively available to you. You have a top-end paintbrush, which is similar to these ones here, which I use, and that's the Winsor & Newton Series 7 paintbrushes. That's an English brand. It is available worldwide, I believe, on some websites like Amazon. I get mine from Ken Bromley, and they're a fairly expensive paintbrush. I tend to wait until there's a deal on. Ken Bromley usually has a deal. I recently got this in like a Christmas special where they had some extra discounts, but it works out approximately £10 a paintbrush. You then have the medium range, which I've just got a small selection here. Now this would be, in my eyes anyway, the Citadel range of paintbrushes, maybe some Army Painter paintbrushes, and that's a brush which is actually very good, but not like top-notch quality. And then you have the budget range of paintbrushes, which I've just got a few here. In actual fact, I do have an Army Painter one in here, but that's just because this is an old brush. But this is the type of thing where you could go into Poundland or WH Smith's or somewhere, and you can buy a pack of 5 paintbrushes really cheap. They're usually synthetic paintbrushes, and they don't last very long. But each one of these ranges of brushes here has a firm place in your paintbrush collection. Now, one thing you'll notice over the years of painting is you will build up a huge selection of paintbrushes. Even paintbrushes which no longer have bristles on will become mixing sticks, etc. So you will build up quite a big collection, and what tends to happen as you use the brushes is they move from one pile to the next. So this top end brush, as it gets quite worn out, will become a medium end brush, and then a medium end brush will move over to the low quality brush. And that's absolutely fine. That's how we like to have our paintbrushes. Just make sure that your top end paintbrushes are easily distinguished from the rest of them. I sometimes will do that by painting the end of the brushes on the new one. So I'll put a little bit of paint here, say green or something, and I'll know they're my latest batch of brand new brushes, so I don't get them mixed up. So what makes a good brush? What makes a bad brush, and why do we need a good mixture? Well, we need a good mixture because you don't want to be painting everything with your top quality paintbrush. There may be some jobs which it's just not necessary to have your best brush doing. So, for example, say a base coat. You don't need your best brush to do a base coat. So your best brushes tend to be more for your detailing work and your edge highlighting. The stuff, the really important stuff that you want to make sure is the best quality that you can get it. That's where your best brushes comes in. And what makes the best brush? Well, it's effectively, let's just take one of these off. Just gonna try and zoom in on this a little bit. Where are you? Okay, now this is a brand new brush, actually, never been used. But what makes a good brush is how long the point and the end stays pointy, and how long the brush flips back into its position, the original position. The longer that brush does that for, the better the brush. So in actual fact, all the brushes are very good at the beginning of their life. It's how long they last which determines how good a brush is. So on average, I do probably about 50 hours of painting a month. So I average about 10 to 15 hours of painting a week. Not a huge amount, but you know, a reasonable amount for considering it's just my hobby. I'm not a commissioned painter. So I do about 50 hours of painting a month, and well, I don't actually use the cheap brushes for painting models. I use those for things like terrain, maybe for putting PVA glue on something. You know, that's what I use my cheap brushes for. I pretty much don't use those for painting models. The medium quality brushes, the Games Workshop ones, well, the old Games Workshop ones I found lasted me about a month, about 50 hours worth of painting. The new paintbrushes that they have now are a lot better. On average, I get about 150 hours from a paintbrush, so that's about 3 months worth of painting. The top end Winsor & Newton paintbrushes, I get about a year to 2 years worth of painting, depending on how well I look after them. We are going to cover looking after your paintbrushes later in the video. So you can see there that although these are £10 compared to say about £4 or 50p, these here will last me a lot longer than one of these, and of course in the long run I am actually saving money. Now I've got no qualms with the Citadel paint brush range. I'm quite happy to go out if one of my new brushes here is no longer usable and I need a good quality brand new brush. I've got no qualms about going out and buying a Citadel brush to tie me over, but ideally I like to have the top end brushes. So that's the different ranges of brushes. I'm going to cover looking after the brushes in a minute, but I also want to now cover the size of the brushes. Now in my top end range of brushes, I generally use 3 sizes, although on the table here I actually have 4 sizes. I have a size 000, which is the smallest one that I use, and it's slightly smaller than the smallest Citadel brush that they sell. I then use a size 0, a size 1 and a size 2. Now a size 2 sounds really big, doesn't it? But let me just take the size 2 brush off. So that is a size 2. It's not huge. Compared to, let's just get while we're here, a 000. So that is a 000. You can see that it's very, very small. This is perfect for edge highlighting. I love this brush for those really, really small fine details, eyes, etc. So I use mainly the 000 and the 0 in this brush range. Sometimes if I've got a slightly bigger model, I will be using the size 1 and possibly the size 2. But I like to have all 4 of those brushes available to use if I need them. So that's the main sizes that I use for actually painting the bulk of my models. You can see some bigger brushes here, and there's obviously an array of different brushes available to you. You know, things like this big flat edge brush. This is great, what I always call a tank brush. So if you've got a really big flat area, this is fantastic for painting that. This is just an old tank brush here, which is slightly splayed out now, but it's still very useful, possibly even for terrain. And of course you've got dry brushes. Now I generally use the Citadel dry brushes because I think they're as good as any. I have got an Army Painter one here. This is no longer usable as a dry brush because it's literally hard as rock, but I still use it because I use it for things like PVA glue, but I find the Citadel brush is pretty good for dry brushing. I've even have a custom brush, this one here. To be fair, this is at its end of life as such, but I had to cut this one off and make a really short brush so that I could get inside a piece of terrain and actually like paint on the inside of the terrain, which I couldn't do with a normal brush. I had to customize a brush there. Okay, so let's talk about caring for your brushes, because if you care for your brushes, they will also last longer, as well as having higher quality brushes. So the first thing is, when you wash your brushes, always wash your brushes with cold water, never hot water. The hot water will get into the little ferrule here, where the hair is glued into the ferrule, and the hot water will damage that glue and make the hairs actually come out. So try and use cold water rather than hot water. Now, in terms of washing your brushes, of course you want to wash them as regular as you can. You don't particularly want to have the paint drying onto your brush. Now, the key thing is, let me just get a big brush because it's probably easier to see. Now, the key thing here is, when you've got your paint and you are dipping your brush into the paint, is you want to make sure that you do not get paint all the way down into this area here, into the ferrule. Because if paint dries in there, it's very difficult to remove, and then it basically dries and it splays out your paint brushes, and you will lose that nice sharp point that you've got there if you start getting dry paint in here. It would also stop them from bending back into the right position. You'll go like that and it will stay to the side. So you 100% want to avoid getting any paint into the ferrule. Now, if it does happen, let's say you accidentally dip it in too quick, immediately rinse out that paint and make sure that it doesn't go in there. Similarly, you don't want to put a dry paintbrush into the paint. Always wet your paintbrush first, because it builds up a little line of defence as such around the ferrule, where if it's clogged with water, it's more difficult for the paint to get in there. Whereas if you dip a dry brush into the paint, the dry brush will just literally soak up the paint, and there's more chance of it going into the ferrule. So just be very conscious and aware when you're putting paint onto the actual paintbrush that you do literally only just put it onto the tip of the paintbrush. Do not put it onto anywhere near where the ferrule is. So we've talked about washing your paintbrush with water, and then obviously just drying that with a paper towel. Next we want to talk about actual brush cleaner stroke preserver. So this would be the next step, and again I get mine from Ken Bromley. I think this was, I'm not sure exactly because I just piled it onto the order. I think it was about £7, something like that, but the last one of these that I bought was about 3 years ago, so it's lasted a long time. So this is effectively like a soap, and then what you would do is, let's just try that's a brand new brush, let's just try this, got this dry brush here. So you dip your brush into some water so that it's wet, and then you just move it around into the soap. You build up a bit of a lava, like so. Now you can continue to clean your brush actually in the pot here, and then get a tissue and just wipe out the excess of the paint that's left there. I personally take it out of the pot and I use the palm of my hand. So I will just literally just move this around here. Now I can instantly see that this soap here is actually changing colour. So there is some old paint in this brush, which I'm not surprised, because I think I did recently use this dry brush here when I was painting, and you can see the green just coming out of that brush. Now obviously this is a dry brush, so I can be a little bit more rougher with it. Of course, this was one of my best brushes. I wouldn't be going backwards and forwards and pushing down on the tip and stuff like this old dry brush. I'd be working it away like this, always coming back onto the ferrule. You can see there all that paint which has come out, so this brush now is a lot cleaner than it was. Now in terms of the smaller brushes, the other thing which you can also do is, once you finish cleaning it, is again go into the soap and just put a little bit of preserver onto the tip, and then just, well, you can use this groove here or your fingers. This groove is quite a good idea, and just sort of twist it into the groove so there's a nice point there, and you can leave that on. And that will preserve the brush until you're ready to use it the next time. Just remember to wash it first before you start using it, and don't lick it first either, because it tastes horrible. And then you can put the lid on and ready to store it. Now, how about storage? How do you store your brushes? Do you store them on the side? Do you store them in your paint pot like this? Nope, neither of those. The way to store your brushes is to store them downwards like that. You want to store them with the tip pointing down. Now the reason for that is, if there is any water down here by the ferrule, we've talked about the ferrule is probably the most important part of a paintbrush to keep clean. The water which is in there has more chance of dripping out, of coming out and drying out of the brush, whereas if you have it upside down, the water has no place to go but down into the ferrule, and it will weaken the little brush hairs, and the brush hairs will come out. Now, of course, if you don't have a paintbrush topper, you can't store them that way. You know, I wouldn't get your brush and just store it with the hairs like that, because obviously that is going to ruin your paintbrushes. But if you have a paintbrush topper on your brush, then use that and store them that way, and that will really help keep the life of your brushes going. So I think that is pretty much everything that I want to cover about paintbrushes. So my advice to you would be, don't buy those cheap, nasty, rubbishy ones to start painting your models, because you'll get disappointed. You know, if you don't have a brush which has got a really nice little tip, you're not going to be painting to your best abilities, regardless of the level of painting that you're at, and you might get disappointed quite quickly. Now, there is a place for those cheaper, nasty brushes, 100%. You know, if you're painting like bases, if you're painting terrain, you know, that type of stuff where it's not essential or important how the paint goes on, as long as the paint goes on, then those brushes definitely have a good place. But if you want to be painting to a good quality, then I would suggest starting out at a medium range. To be fair, probably get the Citadel brushes or the Army Painter brushes. Something in that mid-range to start with. Now, as you progress and as you get better, you'll want better brushes. And like I said before at the beginning, the Winsor & Newton brushes are, you know, one of the better brushes out there. Make sure you only use them for those top-notch jobs rather than using them for everything, because they'll last longer. You know, if you can limit the use of them, then they will last longer. So you're going to get the best value for money from the more expensive brushes. Okay, so I think that's it for this video. I really hope that it was useful to you. Thanks for watching, as always, and watch out for the next episode in the Back to Basics series. Thanks for watching.